Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee on this historic Sunday night, no, September the 1st, 2019, with Hurricane Dorian, the strongest storm ever observed in this part of the Southwest Atlantic in the northwestern Bahamas. It was amazing this morning watching the reconnaissance aircraft reports coming in and watching the pressure drop a couple of millibars every hour, and it just kept going and going and going. And it finally, I believe, hit bottom at 910 millibars and a maximum sustained wind of 185 miles an hour. Now, that is the second strongest that has been observed, and on an official advisory, the strongest being from Hurricane Allen back in 1980, and that was in the Gulf of Mexico. The Hurricane Allen was in many ways was opposite of Dorian, a very big storm in terms of the geography it covered. If you go look at old satellites of Hurricane Allen, the entire Gulf of Mexico was basically covered in clouds, and it reached Category 5 status. And because it wasn't really moving as quickly, it was moving very slowly when it moved into Texas. It weakened to a Category 3 as it moved inland, which was most fortunate. Here, Dorian, of course, hitting the Bahamas, the northern Bahamas at full force over Grand Abaco Island. This morning, the eye went over Elbow Cay, and there are reports of devastation throughout that entire area. It might be a while before we get, some pictures we are getting, but it may be a while before we actually see the extent of the damage that is there. So we're going to go through this. There are a number of factors that we want to look at going forward. I want to go through the advisory just to review a couple of things on the new advisory, which was from 5 p.m. 26/6 77.3, or about 95 miles east of Freeport, Grand Bahama Island, and 175 miles east of West Palm Beach, Florida. Top winds on the advisory 185 miles an hour and moving west at 5. So one change today is that it has been that Dorian has slowed, and this is something that we've been telegraphing for the last couple of days with the collapse of the steering currents due to the weakening of the upper high. So Dorian is behaving pretty much on schedule. It may wind up being a handful of miles further to the west. And I think that slight nudging to the west, some of that may actually have been momentum induced by the storm itself. They do have to deal with their own force essentially as it moves westward. So in a case like this, where you're talking about a handful of miles making a big difference, and I think this may be one of the reasons why the Hurricane Center has gone to a hurricane warning for Jupiter Inlet to the Volusia Brevard County line. So, and that includes Fort Pierce, Port St. Lucie, and a few other towns in that stretch. I just want to I'll pull the map up that I have. It's West Palm Beach is just outside of the hurricane warning on the southern end, and I believe that there. Now I have to double check this now. Excuse me, because the maps here are changing on a semi-regular basis, so it's becoming a little bit more difficult to see what they have. But at least from on the advisory, those are the northern and southern points with respect to the hurricane warnings. They looks like they might have made some sort of change here. I'm going to pull up. I'm going to pull up the Hurricane Center's website really fast to see if they added anything on the 6 p.m. update. The 6 p.m. update, that was the 5 p.m. Advisory, 26/6 77.5. So 75 miles east of Freeport and Grand Bahama Island and 155 east of West Palm. Yeah, I guess they did not. So it's just as I said. I just want to make sure I get the information correct going out with respect to the public advisory. So we're looking at again hurricane warnings from Jupiter Inlet to the Volusia Brevard County line. We have a storm surge warning from Lantana to Volusia Brevard County line. And then they've got other watches and warnings. Go to nhc.noaa.gov and you could pull up the whole list. And of course, you still have hurricane warnings up for the northwestern Bahamas, excluding Andros Island. So just there's going to be some changes along the way, especially after we get through Monday, because we are going to see we're going to start to have to deal with whatever impacts that are going to be occurring up the coast. So let's, I'm going to bring up the satellite loop because it's really impressive tonight. Take a look at this. And by the way, PRJ Grudge and Johnny Quest, thank you both very much for hitting Super Chat tonight. I'm going to come back to the chat board when this is all said and done so we can have a little bit of a conversation. But watch this loop because you'd actually see the eye wall replacement cycle that may have begun. And it looks like it might be doing it rather quickly. These cycles can last anywhere from 6 to 18 hours, and sometimes they can take a day or two to play through. But Dorian continues to mean business here. The eye wall looks like it collapses there earlier, late this morning, early this afternoon, and now you're seeing it come back in the last several frames. You can actually see the depth here, so you're getting that stadium effect. This is really just so impressive. You got that buzzsaw look that you see with these Category 5 hurricanes. And again, in terms of the geography, it isn't that large. It's actually still relatively small, and the gales only go out about 100 or so miles from to the north and a little bit less than that to the south. And you're talking about hurricane force winds really in a very, very tight area around the center. One of the things that we're going to be seeing in the next couple of days, as it's going to slow down even further, stall out perhaps for a number of hours. When it starts its northward motion at some point later on Tuesday, or its north-northwest motion, and then gradually going more to the north, you're going to see an expansion of the wind field, an expansion of the rain shield, and the gales are going to spread out. You're not going to maintain the Category 5 status. You will start a gradual weakening as it moves northward, and that's understandable. There's a tendency for storms to do that when they start moving up north, up toward 30 degrees north and beyond. For one thing, the ocean water temperatures where Dorian is at the moment they're incredibly warm. They're in the mid to upper 80s, but it's deep water. That the warm water goes all the way down. So this is not just maybe 6 feet or 12 feet. It goes way down, and that is really like rocket fuel for these storms. And you get these pockets in some areas. The Gulf of Mexico has pockets like this as well, where you get a storm over that that area under the right upper air conditions, and you're going to see them explode to these monsters. By the way, if you look at the Florida coast, because you're getting subsidence going on in the upper atmosphere, dry air gets evacuated out of the hurricane and sinks around it. So you're actually getting blue sky and reasonably dry air aloft at least. So there was a fair amount of sunshine today. Yes, you are seeing some showers and a few squalls coming in from off the ocean from northeast to southwest. But if you didn't know if you weren't told that a hurricane was out there, I think you would probably not notice the difference very much. So here's how it looks on the radar map that you can get from the Philly website, weather.gov/PHI, the Mount Holly website. And the radar echoes from Dorian and that almost perfectly circular eye. If you move it straight west, it's going to go right over Freeport in Grand Bahama Island, and then from there we'll start to nudge it more toward the north. You can see the coastal cities in Florida that are involved. I wish we could have had at least a few wind reports to see from the Bahamas. There is one, and this is from Settlement Point, where the wind is north at 30 miles an hour. But as far as all the other observing stations are concerned, we're really not seeing very much. And as far as weather conditions, again, along the Florida coast are concerned, you're seeing a few showers coming in, and there's some just off of West Palm Beach. The wind there is north at 18. The wind at Lake Woodruff is north-northwest at 7, gusting to 17. Up at Port St. Lucie, it's north at 12, gusting to 17. And at Boca Raton, it is north at 17 with a gust of 29. So you're seeing some breezes gusting up along the shore, but still got a ways to go before we're going to see winds up closer to gale force. Marsh Harbor, a town in Abaco Island, is currently experiencing 168 mile per hour winds. I have just been told this, so that I can't even imagine what that must sound like. And I know how my house sounded during Sandy when we had persistent 60 to 70 mile an hour sustained winds for hours, and you could hear the house literally moaning. I don't know what 168 mile an hour wind would sound like, let alone I'm sure it would probably cause many homes to just disappear. Okay, so here's the Hurricane Center's forecast. Not much has really changed today in terms of, they haven't really done very much with the forecast positions other than to adjust for time. You know, there's been maybe a slight nudging to the left, and certainly with their position for 2 p.m. Tuesday, it's probably less than 60 miles from the Florida East Coast. If that is the case, and this is at the point where we're going to start to see the storm expanding in terms of the wind field, I think the hurricane warning is probably justified. Unless we get some sort of big surprise, it's hard to imagine now with the way Dorian is behaving and what we're seeing, that we suddenly find ourselves with the eye bouncing off the coastline. I could it happen still? Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's certainly possible, but you really have to stick with the idea now that we're going to see it pass just to the east of the Florida coast. You maneuver 20 miles, 30 miles in either direction. That's probably the margin of error. The Hurricane Center's forecast last year, margin of error was about 20 miles in the 48-hour time frame. So that's pretty good. That is actually quite good. And that margin of error has shrunk considerably over the last 10 years. So the Hurricane Center does a very, very good job. And the track down the road through 2 p.m. on Friday, the idea here is to take it northward, just along or just west of 80 degrees west, turn it northeastward to off the South Carolina coast, probably passing very close to or over the Outer Banks of North Carolina during Friday, finding itself Friday afternoon east of the North Carolina coast, well southeast of the Delmarva Peninsula. Now from here, and I will address this when we go to the maps, I think it goes basically northeast. When you see it on the map, on the models, you're going to notice that the rain shield on the west increases. And one of the things that came to my mind when I was looking at the GFS last night was the fact that I felt like I was looking at a winter storm, and where you are looking at a low going out east of the Delaware coast and south of Long Island and southern New England, and looking to see if the low is going to go to the left of 70 degrees west so that it would bring snow to the coastal areas. So this is a situation here, and it really kind of looks like this, like a winter storm with the back end, as far as the precip shield is concerned. So we'll see how far west and north that back edge precip shield. I think you have to. My thinking is maybe it gets for a short time into southern New Jersey, possibly eastern Long Island and southeastern New England for a little bit. If it tracks the way Matthew tracked, that brought in some rain here and a little bit of wind, but not a whole lot of wind. That's a longer term view. And then we have to look at the possibility of a wrapped up low heading further northeast and impacting Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And I want to definitely take a look at that. Here's the Melbourne, Florida radar, which is, again, as I said, is if you're in Florida and you're looking at this, if somebody said to you, if you didn't know there was a hurricane out there, the weather that you'd be getting would not necessarily tip it off. Uh, about the only thing that might tip it off to you that there's something out there in the Atlantic is the fact that the echoes are coming in from the northeast and moving northeast, southwest. So if you're weather keen, you might say connect that to the fact that there's a circulation of some sort out in the ocean. And from the Miami radar perspective, you actually can see the western edge of some of the bands that are moving across the western part of Grand Bahama Island and moving from north to south. So you're seeing the western side of the storm. The new recon, there's a new recon mission on its way, and it perhaps will be, it should be close enough to the eye so that we'll get an eye reading before we're done with this live stream. So we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. All right, so I left up the European model. It's as good as any today because they're really all very close. And the European has by tomorrow morning, this is where it was this morning at 8 a.m. So by 8 a.m. tomorrow, it will be over Grand Bahama Island. It's almost there now, so it's just going to be sitting there for much of the night. And then on Tuesday, 24 hours later, it barely moves. So it's still there, and it's actually maybe about only 60 or so miles. I thought the European was perhaps slightly more tucked in and slightly a little bit further to the west on this run. But again, at this point, we're talking a handful of miles here. It wasn't a significant enough move. It's not as if they brought the center on land, but it's certainly close enough that you're going to see weather, wind, rain, and some tidal flooding up and down the Florida coast during beginning tomorrow and then for Tuesday as well. I remember with Matthew, with the storm passing, literally bouncing along the coast all the way up in the Jacksonville area. I recall that there was record tidal flooding there that came in on a north wind. And plus, you just came off the new moon. So the folks that live in that area have been posting about what they call the king tides, which are the highest tides of the season. And they're usually generated by a full moon or a new moon, and in this case, we just had the new moon. I believe was yesterday. If I'm not mistaken. So going forward on the European, and the other models again do the same. So by Wednesday, you're still not out of Florida here. You're still getting the impacts, and that the storm center is probably just again maybe about 40 miles, 50 miles just to the east of the North Florida coast by Wednesday morning. By Thursday morning, off the South Carolina coast. The one thing I will say, and models tend to be this way with these storms, that the Hurricane Center's positions are about the same, but they are a little bit faster. And usually that does happen. The storms do wind up, if there's an indicator that the storm is going to wind up accelerating in the northeast, it usually winds up doing it faster than what the models are showing 3 or 4 days out. So the European, a bit slower than the Hurricane Center forecast. Looks like it's south of Charleston by about 80 or 90 miles on Thursday morning, over the Outer Banks by Friday morning. It actually puts the low L print. It looks like it may be over or just west of Cape Hatteras here. And of course, you see the high that's up in New Brunswick, in southeastern Canada, in Quebec, and the easterly isobars that are setting up in southern New England down into the mid-Atlantic states. The gradient gets pretty tight down in Chesapeake Bay, Delmarva, southeastern Virginia, North Carolina. Then it's out to Saturday morning where we're sitting with a low at roughly 40.3 and 67.7. So if this were the winter time, there probably would be some heavy snows going on in Massachusetts and Connecticut and maybe even into eastern Long Island with a setup like this. But of course, now you're not that far from Halifax and Nova Scotia here, and the European, it's in 24-hour increments, and it looks like it just slides it just south of Nova Scotia. So I'm going to pick up I'm going to go to the GFS so we can see the precip. And in fact, before that, we do that, let's look, I want to look at the upper air. We'll look at the upper air. It's so interesting how, 5 to 7 days out in what we were seeing, you kind of, what happens is you sort of get the clues of how the atmosphere is going to set up, and then you have to watch to see how the chess pieces move around. And we talked about the fact that we've had this big upper high in the Atlantic. You've got this big upper high in the southwest, Dorian in the middle, and there's a short wave tomorrow morning that is running from Lake Huron down into North Carolina. You can see the southern, that last line, that last height line in North Carolina. That's the southern edge of the westerly winds in the upper atmosphere. South of there, Dorian is sitting in this no man's land. There's no flow. The high now is weak to the east, so it's lost that, and the high to the west is not quite there. So that short wave lifts out as we head into Tuesday, and the high starts to build back in the Atlantic, and it builds northward, north of Bermuda, and you've got the upper high in Kansas, Dorian in the middle, and another short wave that is swinging across into western New York and western Pennsylvania. Those two short waves are going to bring cold fronts through the northeast, one late tomorrow with maybe some showers and storms late in the day, and another one late on Wednesday. That pulls out, and then there's another short wave that comes down in that northerly flow and picks up Dorian and kicks it on out to the northeast, punts it up like a football, and again, it looks like it passes very close to Nova Scotia and over toward Newfoundland. So you get a flavor of the upper air now. It's developed a certain sense of consistency. I wouldn't expect it to change too much, but let's look at the GFS, because at least with the GFS, the new GFS, we've got the precip shield on there. And actually, I know that some of the folks from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland are watching. So you do have the GFS on its 138 hour with a pretty wrapped up low there, just south of the coast of Nova Scotia. So it kind of makes sense to me that that would be the case. So I'm going to roll it back. We'll see if the new GFS jogs a little west or a little east. Don't be surprised if you see that. You might see it jog west on one, little west on one run, a little east on the other, but it'll probably maintain its consistency from run to run. Again, no landfall here, but it does get it very close. Starting, I got it from Monday evening, and there's your cold front that is coming through from Maine down to New York City to about Washington, D.C. There's a cold front that's going to be coming through tomorrow evening with some showers and storms. Going into Tuesday morning, I want to make sure you guys can see the time here. This is at 2 a.m. on Tuesday. You are starting to make that move, moving north-northwest. That's not that far off the coast there near Melbourne. It's probably only about 40 or so miles just off the coast of Melbourne on that in that frame. This is Tuesday night. Notice the difference here from Monday night to Tuesday night. That is, it barely, does it move maybe 100 miles? Barely. It's really moving slowly. And again, at this point now, you're getting that expansion of the wind field, the expansion of the precip field. The coastal areas are probably of Florida, where you have the warnings up, are probably getting into the heavy rain and gales, possibly even storm force winds. And then moving along, you make the turn into the Georgia coast. I don't want to forget the Georgia coast. A lot of times on the angle of approach, the Georgia coast gets spared any significant action, but this does seem to hug the coast on the GFS certainly, which would bring gales and rain all the way up through Jacksonville, Savannah, and then into South Carolina. Actually, it gets fairly close to Charleston here. The GFS brings the storm pretty much right overhead over Wilmington to the Outer Banks. And there you see the rain shield even making it up into the southern parts of the Delmarva Peninsula, southeastern Virginia, kind of touches there into southern New Jersey for a short time, and it gets very close to the south shore of eastern Long Island. It's a fairly wrapped up low, and then out it goes. And now you're taking it on up into Nova Scotia, and it goes west of Newfoundland, by the way, on the GFS. I believe on the European it goes over or just east of. I can double check. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to tell because the European you have to guess because it's in 24-hour increments. So we'll bring up just to go into the longer range here. Let's bring up the southeastern Canada map, which is here we go. So here's how it looks from the standpoint of southeastern Canada on the GFS. So there's your low, and it's fairly deep, and it goes west of Newfoundland and on up into Labrador, and we've got some snow showing up there. If the post-tropical low of Dorian produces maybe the first heavy snows for parts of Labrador, that'd be something. Here's I'm just for laughs. We'll bring up the 24-hour snow. There it is, up in Labrador. That would be Dorian induced if the GFS verifies. And I just want to double check to make sure with the European in terms of the track here. So I'll just bring that up on this view. And indeed, the European actually just takes it that very wrapped up low, very close to or over Nova Scotia and right over Newfoundland before it's on its way out to Iceland. And by the way, you'll notice that at least on the European, I didn't look at the GFS. We do have other systems in the tropics now that are going to try to get going, including one that's south of the Cabo Verde Islands. And you can see that the European does try to do something with a couple of systems out there in the longer term. Now whether they wind up having any kind of impact down the road, I honestly haven't had the time to even begin to look. But look, I think it's pretty safe to say that everything is on the table. There really isn't too much that's going to be changing going forward. Here's again that European view and the track. On the GFS is about the same. Maybe it's tucked in a little bit further to the west, but I really didn't see any big difference. These are the hurricane tracking models, model guidance by the way, just if you pull these maps up, and you can get them on tropicaltidbits.com, I just want to give you a heads up. They first appear roughly close to the initialized time. So this is initialized at 18Z at 2 p.m. So you might have some models already done by 2:30, and you pull up the map and there'll be some plots. But if you call it back up a little bit later in the evening, you may find additional model plots that are added to it. So just bear that in mind. It's not just issued once, but as some of these hurricane models, and there are a couple of dozen of them, as they come out, they add them to this map. So this is pretty consistent. It's a little less tucked in near the Georgia, South Carolina coast on these tracking maps, on these tracking models, the hurricane models. They have adjusted from what I saw earlier today, from the earlier runs. They have adjusted a little bit to the left, particularly up near the North Carolina coast. There's been a bit of a nudge to the left there, and just a bit of a nudge to the left off the Florida coast in the position that it's in right now. All right, so back to the recon. Let's see if we've got anything here. All right, it's just about getting ready to go into the eye, and the purple wind barbs. It's coming in from the northwest side, which is usually you get the weaker winds. So it's flying into the eye right now with winds. It just left a whole slew of observations between 64 and 83 knots. So let's see what happens when it comes out of the other side. It'll be interesting to see what it pulls down for a pressure and for a maximum sustained wind. You know what we can do now? Why don't we do this? I'm going to pull up the upper air just to take a general view of the longer range pattern. Not that I'm expecting any big surprises, by the way, because it's been short waves and troughs dropping into the east, and here's Dorian, of course, and you can see how we're getting the Atlantic perspective here, and you can see the continuation of this overall pattern that we've been in since June, where the northern jet just activates every so often, and you get the jet stream to drop down into Virginia, and sometimes even a little further south than that. Here's where the short waves pick up Dorian and kick it out. You've got another short wave coming early next week, a week from Monday. And then the European briefly brings in a ridge here into the east by day 10. Is it there for real or not? I don't know. There's something swinging down from Labrador back west southwest, and you've got this upper high up in central Canada that's building. Just kind of curious to see what it looks like on the North America view. And this only goes out to 240. Well, it's kind of interesting. You have a bit of a split flow developing, an upper high in the south, a jet that runs right along the border states from the plains to New England, a bit of a cutoff high there that's north of Lake Winnipeg, and you have a flow coming down from northern Canada toward Lake Superior and then swinging eastward into New England. So it looks to me like it's evolving. It may be something that's going to evolve into something. Maybe take another week or so to play out. So perhaps we're at a point where something's going to change. But I want to be careful drawing any kind of conclusions, if only because of the fact that, again, I was so hurricane focused. I really haven't had time to take a deep look in terms of the long range. Once again, thanks again, Johnny Quest and PRJ Grudge, for hitting Super Chat tonight. I really do appreciate it greatly. Let me come full screen here. And hang on a moment. Okay, so there you go. There I am. All right, so I hope everybody's had a very good weekend. Hang on. Jason Schaefer on board. I see Jess Harden. DWD hashtag says, flew back from London to Tampa Friday and the flight was almost empty. Flight attendant said they were overbooked for the trip going back. So everybody was trying to run away. And yet, if you're in Western Florida, although you probably had people that were trying to leave that were in Eastern Florida that went to Tampa to try to find a way to get out. But not much going on in the western part of the state out of this. So a little surprised that they would, well, then again, people might be just trying to grab a flight anywhere they can and driving to whatever airport could get them out of there. Kane, what excites the weather from Africa that impacts us this time of year? Well, you have the monsoon season in Africa. This is the rainy season that moves up from the equator and pulses northward, and you get waves that move across Africa from east to west, and they move off the African coast. And when they pass south of the Cabo Verde Islands, there's a window from about August through a good chunk of the month of September where the ocean water temperatures are very warm, and you get some of these storms, these systems to spin up into what could be tropical depressions or tropical storms, and sometimes even hurricanes, what we used to call the Cape Verde season or the Cabo Verde season. It's about a 6 to 8 week window where you get these storms, and it has to do with the monsoonal rains that move northward from the equator this time of year up into Africa. And there's also been, after we had that big plume of Saharan dust that came off back about a week or so ago, or a little bit longer, now not seeing that. And Saharan dust can oftentimes get in the way of the systems developing. ANM weather, I wonder how much of a subtropical system it'll be by Thursday. It looks so lopsided on the models. Will it be a strong subtropical or storm? I think what you'll probably see until it gets up closer to, as long as they can identify a core, some kind of warm core, even though it may look less and less quote unquote tropical, even though it'll lose, it's not going to look like it looks now. you're definitely going to see a different look to it when you look at it on the satellite lake this week. But it'll maintain enough tropical characteristics, I'm guessing, that they will leave it as a tropical storm, even a tropical system, even as it heads up toward Nova Scotia. Now, if it starts accelerating at 60 miles an hour or so, then they'll probably make it post-tropical. But you know what? That's an analysis for down the road. You're gonna have to just have to wait for it to happen in order to see what the we'll see whether they're going to leave it alone when it gets up to that latitude or not. And you go back in history, if you look at the history of past tracks, it's not unusual for them to leave them as tropical systems pretty far up. Mary Daniels, also remember that hurricanes, although dangerous for humans, are big stirrers of the ocean, bringing up stale waters, red tides, and big pockets of the equatorial warmth. Hurricanes function as a way of redistributing heat. They are an important function of the atmosphere. The summer months, the overproduction of heat that needs to be redistributed, and that's what hurricanes do. They redistribute that heat so that eventually everything just settles down and it's equal, and it's a process. If we didn't have that process underway, that would cause more issues climate wise, I think. If I'm not a climatologist, but I bet you if you talk to folks that are knowledgeable about climate and you ask them, okay, so let's say we did something to stop hurricanes from happening, what would be the outcome? I don't think it would be a good one. You need to have that. There's a reason why they occur, and that is to redistribute the excess heat that is built up during summer months, both in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere. Except in the southern hemisphere, it happens while we're sitting in our winter. So, Mary, you're quite right. It does have. There's a reason things happen the way they happen. I'm running back on the chat here. The weather onion is overwrought with adjectives of doom, says Donna Lavasseur. Well, yeah, I would not be surprised. I would just say this is a serious situation. The Even for the Florida East Coast, uh, if as long as the center doesn't come along over land, it should be um, manageable. But you don't, I don't know. We don't know really specifically until we get through it to see what the ultimate outcome will be with regards to the impact with tidal flooding, tidal surge, and everything else. But um, it certainly would be a much different story if that we had a landfall. And now, of course, let's not forget that for the northern Bahamas, for Grand Bahama Island, for Great Abaco Island, we are talking devastation here with what's happened and the track with the eye of the storm going right overhead. I'm going to check. I'm going to go check the recon again to see if we've got some more winds, and indeed we do. We don't have a pressure print yet, but I am seeing wind barbs. If definitely seeing 113 to 137, and actually am seeing some wind barbs of 137 knots plus as they flew in from the northwest into the eye. So it's certainly still a Category 5 hurricane. Now we'll wait to see what kind of pressure printout we get by them while they're hanging out over there and doing their thing. And they do these multiple flies. They go through the center once and they fly up. They'll go north and then come back around. And by the time they get back the second time around, of course, the eye now has moved, so they're getting a new pressure reading, probably an hour or so later. They'll get a new pressure reading and a new round of wind that from a different spot. And all that data is incredibly useful when it comes to dealing with these tropical systems. Alex Adam, the whistling of the wind sounded like a trumpet. It made your ears ring. Are you on the are you on the Bahamas right? Or are you in the Bahamas right now? I don't see. I'm trying to scroll back to see the beginning of the thread. Looks like Irma, certainly every bit as powerful as Irma was at Irma's peak, and it might be just a little bit smaller, but it also has that buzzsaw. Irma was kind of was on the larger side of the if you want to compare Irma, Maria, and Dorian in terms of the geographic coverage, it is a bit on the larger side. Um, it's intensifying heading west, Florida Keys, Mike. Okay, Mike Akulian, it's not heading to the Florida Keys. Okay, that ain't happening. Not this time around. You know, Irma, as I recall, it was so interesting with Irma because you figured out the forecast error with Irma was that they were too far north. Models kept coming in too far north, and there were distinct errors in where models were taking Irma, and the errors would show up 6 and 12 hours later, and you'd see that they were off by 30 or 40 miles too far to the north, and it was an error that was very consistent all the way through. So that you wound up, I think, if I recall, at one point Irma was forecast by models to go in somewhere along the mid coast of Florida, and it wound up passing south of the Keys right through the Florida Straits. That's how big the error is. Do I still think it's going to turn to the north like the models are showing because it's still going due west? Look, yeah, Peter. I honestly, I think it is. They're all about the same, and there still certainly could be some room for jogs of miles certainly, and those jogs can become very important. I don't want to discount them. You get a big enough jog of about 20 or 30 miles, and you're suddenly talking about the eye wall maybe touching the Florida East Coast. So we have to be really careful here. But I think still ultimately the way it's setting up, the idea of it turning northward and then moving up off the South Carolina coast and then turning and going over the Outer Banks, I think that makes the most sense here. If the upper high were building over the top of it, and the short wave that was coming down in that northern part of the jet was not extending as far south, then I would say, okay, there's more possibilities here for some weird stuff to happen, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing the short wave strong enough where you have the ridge in the Atlantic, and then you've got the ridge out to the west in the plains, and there's this that sort of zone in the middle of weak flow. You're not seeing the upper high basically stretching from the Atlantic all the way west into the plains. Earlier this week, it looked like that was possible, and that's why you had some model runs taking this across the state of Florida, out into the Gulf of Mexico, and even as far west as the Central Gulf, and that certainly did not that certainly is not going to come to pass. Not looking forward, Roy Wilson, to watching roads washing out all around you on the north as it comes closer to the North Carolina coast. Yeah, there's a couple of days for it to get there. The waters are going to be high. There's going to be a lot of tidal flooding out of this, up and down from the Carolinas down through Florida with that new moon, and also every the way this thing is tracked, you got a lot of water that's basically being pushed back toward the southeast coast of the U.S. Down to Florida. That's really not going to have anywhere to escape. Uh, Maybe the fact that this was a small hurricane in geographic coverage perhaps limits that to a certain extent. But I think the tidal flooding is something that they're going to have to pay very, very close attention to. Okay, so by the way, I know some people aren't on the chat board and they lurk, and I do have folks that watch this on the replay will put comments on, which you can do, and certainly feel free. I do get a kick out of the fact that um, folks, will put down as I think it's going to go in this place, and it's usually whenever they do name a place, it's always about 90 degrees away from reality. In this instance, it's good across Florida and then headed to the Gulf of Mexico. I would just, and I gladly welcome any comments at all. And if you give that reason, if you say things something like that, just add the reason. Tell me that the reason is because I think the upper high is going to build. Tell me that you know there's the flow is going to turn from one direction versus another. Um, but don't just sort of haphazardly put up. I think this is going to happen. I just want a little bit of understanding of where you're coming from, so that if you're right, I will learn something. And if on the small chance that the commenter is wrong, then the commenter will learn something. Okay? I'm putting it that way in a slightly passive aggressive way. Eileen, I'm sorry, Ellen Abraham. Thank you again. Ellen Abraham from Alaska, whose winter will be getting underway long before our winters will be getting underway. Thank you so much for super chat tonight. Really appreciate it very, very much. I don't think there were any audio problems tonight because I didn't see anybody say that we had some, so that's a good thing. That's always a positive. Okay. Oh, Tony 3821. The 18Z HMON shows landfall at Cape Canaveral. Okay, be careful with the HMON. I'll bring it up. I'm going to bring it up right now. Be careful with the HMON model, if only because that's actually pretty good with intensity. It was supposed to be pretty good with intensity, but it isn't exactly very good with positioning. Because I think a few runs back, maybe a day or so ago, it had it going through the Keys, and then on the very next run, it had it making landfall in Jacksonville. Mike Cooligan is, you live in Florida Keys. Your nickname is Florida Keys Mike. I said it's still intensifying and heading west towards West Palm Beach. I know it's not coming to. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. No, I read what was on there, so I was trying to find the rest of the thread, and I didn't. So I appreciate you correcting me, and thank you so much. So now we got that straight. All right. Let's see. Alex added, my internet is not working well, so I can't predict where it's going to go. Okay. You didn't say Alex. I was wondering because you sounded like you were in the Bahamas. Carlos Gradicos, can it happen that the ridge happens on top of Florida? Well, if the ridge were to build across the top, it would build across the southeast, Carlos, and then you've got the ridge of the southern plains, and they would sort of connect so that you would have had a continuation of the easterly flow, the flow from east to west, and the steering currents would still be pushing it to the west if the ridge were to move to build across the top. Okay. By the way, the HWRF model is like a broken clock. A lot of the times, it's right twice a year, so just bear that in mind. It also will, for every 12 times, 10 or 12 times that it makes a Category 3 or higher major hurricane, reality only produces about one. So just bear that in mind. It's not, it's not the Einstein of weather models. And I think what usually happens at this point is there's so many models that we go shopping. Okay, we basically go shopping for the model that makes us that gives us the outcome that we want. So here is this is the HWRF, and this is the track. Just going back, I'm just trying to get this to load because it takes forever. Everybody's on tropicaltidbits.com. I don't know why that site is so popular. So here it is, the HMON. I'm sorry, the HWRF for 2 a.m. With a 9, what is that, a 914 or a 911? 911 low, 919, 913, 914. So still a Category 5. moving west-northwest. We are at um, 4 p.m. Monday, and this model actually keeps it going, uh, taking it now. It's only out to 54 hours, so it's just about on the coast. So what's different here is that the HWRF is not. It kind of keeps it moving at about 5 miles an hour, I guess, right through the day tomorrow, and it wobbles its way toward the coast. The GFS is going to probably not be that far away. Ultimately, it'll be east of here, but not too far east of here. And the European's going to be probably east of here, but not too far east of here come Tuesday morning. But we only have out to 54 hours, so that's what that one does. And you know what? We could go, by the way, all day long, pulling up. Um, as I said, we can shop for whatever model makes you happy, if you want. So here's the HMON, which is loading slowly, but it's loading, going backwards as I'm trying to get a starting point here. So this point here is at 2 p.m. Monday, and we have a 9:15 low northwest of Grand Bahama Island, and moving west to west-northwest toward the coast and inland. It bounces on the coast Wednesday morning. Okay, that's Wednesday morning. Okay, that's how slow this is moving. So it's probably moving at about 2 or 3 miles an hour, and it just keeps moving west. And finally, you start to see Wednesday morning after it bounces on the coast near Cape Canaveral and starts to wobble its way northward toward Jacksonville. So that last frame there is at 2 a.m. on Thursday. I, at this point, it's just time to just let things happen. And as far as the weather in Florida is concerned, you really hope that the eye does stay offshore. That would be the best outcome. That through all of this, that Dorian, just the eye of the hurricane, just stays offshore and maneuvers around, stays off the Georgia coast, stays just off the South and North Carolina coast. You get the rain, you get some wind, it's manageable, and it's not devastating with widespread damage and that stuff that's life changing. Anthony Orr, our resident statistician, along with Scott Briller, the chairman, who I think is taking a little time off today to play some tennis. NHC predicts that Dorian will slow down even more than it is now. If Dorian stays moving at 5 miles an hour with no further reduction in speed, does that increase or reduce the landfall? Depending on the direction, assuming that it's still Anthony moving to the west. So if it moves 5 miles an hour, Grand Bahama Island, I believe Freeport is about, 100 miles off the Florida coast. So you're talking 20 hours at 5 miles an hour. So that would put it on landfall sometime early on Tuesday. So it is possible, if that happens, then if it's, kind of, could it happen? I guess it could. I mean, it's not impossible. Christopher, you know the rest. Hey, Joe, how close do you think Dorian could come to New England? Since some of the models, I honestly, Chris, I think the flatness of the upper flow is probably going to take it south of Nantucket by a fair distance. But it might be close enough, certainly, to bring some rain to southern and southeastern New England and maybe some gales, particularly for southeastern New England. But I will also say, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, it is the issue for the end of the week. So it's probably better that we wait till Monday night and Tuesday to really give it a good look as far as what might happen. So this way, at least we know how it's played out as far as Florida is concerned. If it winds up tracking a little further west and you're dealing with a storm that's bouncing off the coastline, it's ultimately going to probably impact where it goes in off the Georgia coast, the South Carolina, North Carolina, Outer Banks. Does it go Outer Banks or does it go, just inland near Elizabeth City? If that's the case, if you make a westward adjustment, because then you got to adjust it all the way up. So let's wait till tomorrow night, or better yet, even on Tuesday. We could certainly speculate about it a bit more tomorrow night. but then we can look at it as far as maybe on Tuesday to give us so we can get a better idea what the impact as far as southeastern New England, if there's going to be impact. I think we can say MWD that the European has done a great job with the storm. It's been consistent on a graze of Florida before landfall in North Carolina. Well, all right, I will say this. Once it figured out it wasn't, you remember the European was the southernmost and the westernmost of all the tracks, but it was the first one to show the offshore track. If that winds up verifying, so I guess one of the problems I have with jumping on board with respect to, oh, this model's great and this model's not great, this model was terrible and everything else, is your point of reference. So do you say the model did great and just ignore the fact that back not that many days ago, it was the furthest south and furthest west of all the models? Or do you look at it where when it was one of the first models to show the offshore track, and if that winds up verifying, then that's the one you go with. If you're following my logic here, at what point at one point did it become where you could say it did the good job? And I think my argument would be is you could probably look at it both ways, and I guess there's more value to the fact that the European was the first one to take the more eastern track. But on the other hand, when you saw it pop up, how did you know that that was just an outlier? This is another reason why, and I said this when we saw this starting to develop with respect to how do you handle it with communicating the information to Florida. And my response to that was you had to wait at least several model cycles in order to get some sort of verification that that was going to be correct. Once you had that, then you could be certainly a lot more confident. But you couldn't just jump on one model run and say, "Hey, this is what it's going to be." So you don't have to worry about a hurricane watch. You don't have to worry about a hurricane approaching your area. And how about all the models breaking up the storm? Well, and here's another thing, Peter Bicker, and I actually go back to a time where the global models just really didn't handle tropical systems at all very well from start to finish. And honestly, I kind of prefer it that way because first of all, then you actually have to think for yourself in order to make the forecast, but it also makes you look at all the other factors as far as strengthening, whether conditions are favorable, unfavorable. You look at the satellites very closely. You look for evidence of wind shear and everything else. I almost prefer it when the models don't pick up on these tropical systems because it's a distraction when they spin up these arbitrary category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes all over the place that don't wind up happening in the long range. So I actually rather it this way. I honestly think that in terms of the overall forecasting that was done, the real forecasting that was done by the Hurricane Center and by others out there, very good. Certainly, they've done a very, very good job. All right, we're coming up on 7:30. We've been at it for an hour on a very busy night. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Glad you're coming in on a Sunday night live stream. We've had a couple of hundred people on, and that's always good. I love to see a big crowd. So thanks so much for being here. As always, there is continuing weather coverage on my weather platform on Patreon, and that is my subscription platform, which is just $2 a month. So I'm gonna put the link up there for you. You can jump on board with you if you like. There's also a link on the descriptor to this live stream or the descriptor to this video. And schedule-wise, tomorrow is going to be a regular Monday for me because I'm working. So I will have a weather in 5 tomorrow morning. And that then will have a weather in 10, which for both of them, they'll probably wind up being a little bit longer. We'll have a weather in 10 for Patreon folks a little bit later in the day. And then we will have our regular YouTube live stream tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And Joe Rayo is around tomorrow with me, so I'll bring him on and we'll do the show together. So look forward to Joe Rayo and Joe Chaffee together on a YouTube version of the Joe and Joe Weather Show tomorrow night as we watch whatever new historic developments there are with respect to Hurricane Dorian. So one last check of the recon before I go. Okay, so one last check. Do we have a pressure print? Okay, 916 millibars. So we are up 6 millibars. This actually verifies what we saw on the loop, which it appears that there is an eye wall replacement cycle that is underway. And also, I want to give one last check to see if there's any updates with regards to advisory or location. So the 7 o'clock position was 26.6, 77.6. And I just want to see, what was it on the official advisory from 5 o'clock? So at the 5 o'clock advisory, it was at 77.3. So we've moved 3/10, 18 miles in, right, 0.6 miles per tenth, if I remember correctly. So we've moved 18 miles in about 2 hours. So it's kind of moving along there, maybe at about 7 or 8 miles an hour, if that's the case. We'll see what they say on the advisory. I will tell you this. If you go, by the way, on the Hurricane NHC's website, you pull up the forecast advisory, you can see the wind field in terms of the diameter of the wind. So for right now, 64 hurricane force winds extend 40 miles to the northeast, 30 miles to the southeast, 25 southwest, and 25 northwest. 50 knot winds go 80 northeast, 50 southeast, 50 southwest, 50 northwest. And gales go out 120 miles to the northeast, 110 to the southeast, 70 to the southwest, and 90 to the northwest. So it's a little bigger than what it was yesterday in terms of the geography covered, but it's still on the smallish side. So we'll see what the wind field does tomorrow. And once it starts to show signs that it's going to start moving to the north and picking up a little bit of steam, you're going to see that wind field expand, and you're going to see the rain shield expand as well. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you again. Thank you, Ellen Abraham, Johnny Quest, PRJ Grudge for hitting Super Chat tonight. And we'll see you tomorrow. Again, weather in 5 in the morning, weather in 10 for Patreon folks, members in the afternoon, and a regular live stream tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. And Joe Rayo will probably